When Marilyn Monroe married Joe DiMaggio in 1954, the world thought it was perfect. America's ultimate sex symbol with America's greatest baseball hero. It lasted 274 days. But Marilyn wasn't alone in making these unexpected choices. In Hollywood's golden age, beauty was a form of currency. The MGM studio system understood this perfectly. If you were stunning enough, young enough, and malleable enough, they could build an empire around your face. And many of them did. Women like Audrey Hepburn, Rita Hayworth, Ava Gardner, these weren't just actors, they were icons. They were meant to marry the handsome leads, the charming co-stars, the men whose looks matched theirs on every magazine cover. But something unexpected happened again and again. Some of the most gorgeous women in Hollywood looked at these perfect men and said no. Instead, they chose someone else entirely, someone older, someone plainer, someone who had nothing to do with the movie industry, and the world couldn't understand why. What we're going to explore today is what happens when a woman at the absolute peak of her beauty and fame decides that appearance isn't what she actually needs. Sometimes these choices led to happiness, sometimes they led to some of the most complicated, painful relationships in Hollywood history, but almost all of them reveal something unexpected about desire, about power, and about what these women really wanted when nobody was watching. Elizabeth Taylor and the pattern with Elizabeth Taylor, we have to talk about a different dynamic entirely. Elizabeth was perhaps the most beautiful woman in Hollywood. She had the most stunning violet eyes anyone had ever seen. She was desired by everyone, and she married 8 times. Only some of her husbands were conventionally handsome movie stars. Her first marriage was to Nicky Hilton, heir to the hotel empire, but not an actor. Her second was to Michael Wilding, who was an actor but was significantly older than her. Her third was to Mike Todd, who was a producer but not an actor and not particularly handsome. Her fourth was to Eddie Fisher, who was a singer and a serious womanizer. Her fifth was to Richard Burton, who was a brilliant actor but looked weathered and worn in a way that didn't match the pristine beauty of Elizabeth's face. With Richard Burton especially, people couldn't understand the attraction. He was older than her. He had a drinking problem. He was often unfaithful. He was brilliant, but difficult and moody. And yet, Elizabeth was arguably more devoted to Richard than to any other man in her life. What emerges from looking at all of Elizabeth's marriages is something interesting. She wasn't attracted to conventional handsomeness. She was attracted to talent, power, and complication. She wanted men who had their own lives, their own reputations, their own struggles. The pretty leading men bored her. The men who were damaged, or difficult, or talented in ways she understood, those were the ones who held her attention. But here's the crucial part. Elizabeth's marriages fell apart one after another. She was married 8 times for a reason. Each time she chose someone who was supposed to be different from the pretty Hollywood boys, she ended up with someone who was also wrong in different ways. The pattern suggests that Elizabeth's problem wasn't about who she chose to marry. It was about her own relationship to love, to commitment, to trust. Audrey Hepburn and the older man. When Audrey Hepburn met Mel Ferrer on a film set in the early 1950s, she was at the absolute height of her fame. She had just starred in Roman Holiday for Paramount Pictures. She was young, elegant, impossibly graceful. She had the kind of beauty that made men stop talking mid-sentence. And Mel Ferrer was none of those things. He was 12 years older than her. He was a character actor, not a leading man. He wasn't particularly handsome by Hollywood standards. His face was angular and weathered. He directed plays off-Broadway and had a background in dance. By all conventional logic, he should have been beneath her, or at least a step down from what someone like Audrey Hepburn could have had. But Audrey saw something in him that the industry didn't value. She saw a director. She saw someone who understood performance in a deeper way than the pretty leading men did. She saw someone who was genuinely talented, and critically, she saw someone who wasn't threatened by her success. They married in 1954, right when Audrey's career was about to explode. She was about to do Sabrina, Funny Face, and Breakfast at Tiffany's. She was becoming one of the biggest stars in the world. The men she could have had would have wanted to control that. Instead, she had chosen someone who wanted to nurture it. For about 10 years, it seemed to work. They had a son together. Mel directed her in films. They built a life that revolved around her career while maintaining what seemed like genuine partnership. But the marriage eventually unraveled. The problem wasn't that he was less conventionally attractive than her. The problem was something much more complicated. Audrey was a perfectionist. She demanded the highest standards of herself and everyone around her. Mel was brilliant, but inconsistent. There were infidelities. There were struggles with substance abuse on his end. There were endless arguments about control. When they finally divorced in 1968, Audrey was devastated. She had tried to make it work with someone who didn't fit the mold, and it had fallen apart anyway. But what's interesting is that she never regretted the choice. She never publicly blamed him. She simply moved forward. And it says something that she had been willing to marry outside the system at all. Rita Hayworth and the Prince. Rita Hayworth was sold to the world as the ultimate sex symbol. Her red hair, her incredible body, her dancing ability. She was supposed to be with powerful men. She was supposed to marry actors or directors who matched her level of stardom. Instead, she married Ali Khan. Ali Khan was the son of a British Indian nobleman. He was charming in a completely different way than movie star charming. He was wealthy. He was connected. He knew people everywhere. He was fun and exciting, but he wasn't famous. He wasn't in the movies. He was a playboy, and Rita married him in 1949. The marriage lasted about a year. What nobody realized at the time was that Ali Khan was, by most accounts, unfaithful and completely uninterested in supporting Rita's career. He wanted a wife. He didn't want Rita Hayworth, the star. He wanted Rita, the woman, who he could keep in homes around the world while he did whatever he wanted. Rita eventually left him, but the experience shaped something in her. She had chosen someone precisely because he wasn't a movie star, because she thought that would mean he'd treat her differently. Instead, it meant he treated her as a possession. He had no respect for her talent or her work. He just wanted her on her arm and in his bed. The story reveals something that the studios didn't want to admit. Some of these actresses chose men outside the industry because they wanted to be seen as more than actresses. They wanted someone who would love the person, not the star. But what they often found was that non-famous men had their own baggage, their own egos, their own expectations. Marrying outside the system didn't guarantee anything except a different kind of complicated. Ava Gardner and the singer who changed her Ava Gardner was one of the most spectacular beauties of Hollywood's golden age. An MGM contract player, she had the kind of face that seemed almost manufactured for the screen, perfectly proportioned, sultry, magnetic. She should have married someone equally beautiful. By every conventional measure, she ended up married to someone who didn't match her appearance at all. Frank Sinatra was not traditionally handsome. He had ears that stuck out. He had a long, angular face. He was skinny in a way that looked awkward in still photographs. But he had something that Rita's or Ava's or other husbands didn't have. He had genuine talent and genuine presence. When he sang, something happened. When he was in a room, he commanded it. What's interesting about Ava and Frank's relationship is that it was based on genuine attraction, but not in the way the studios would have predicted. Ava wasn't attracted to his face. She was attracted to his voice, his charisma, his talent, and also to something darker in his personality. Frank had a temper. He had insecurity. He had a history with other women, but Ava loved him anyway. She married him in 1951, and for years they were one of the most famous couples in Hollywood. Their marriage was intensely volatile. They fought constantly. They cheated on each other. They were jealous and possessive, but they also genuinely cared about each other. There was real passion there, not just physical attraction. Ava once said that she loved Frank because he was talented and damaged and real in a way that the pretty Hollywood men never were. When they finally divorced, Ava didn't regret it exactly, but she was devastated. She spent decades trying to understand what had happened between them. Toward the end of her life, she was living in London, away from Hollywood, and she was still thinking about Frank. Not in a way that suggested she wanted to get back together, but in a way that suggested she understood that he had mattered to her more than any man ever had. What's crucial about Ava's choice is that she wasn't marrying down. She was making a different calculation entirely. She was choosing talent and passion and real emotion over conventional attractiveness. And that choice cost her. But it also made her life more interesting than it probably would have been with a pretty, compliant leading man. Ingrid Bergman and the scandal that changed everything. Ingrid Bergman was one of the most respected actors in the entire world. She had won an Oscar for Gaslight and worked with Alfred Hitchcock on masterpieces like Notorious and Spellbound. She was incredibly talented and also incredibly beautiful in a way that felt intellectual rather than purely physical. She seemed above the gossip and the scandal that consumed other Hollywood women. And then she married Roberto Rossellini, and everyone acted like she had lost her mind. Rossellini was an Italian film director. He was not a leading man. He was not conventionally handsome. He was older. He was married to someone else when Ingrid fell in love with him. And when she became pregnant, and the pregnancy became public, the scandal nearly destroyed her career. This wasn't just about beauty anymore. This was about morality in the American consciousness. Ingrid had seemed perfect, and suddenly she wasn't. The fact that Rossellini wasn't a movie star made it somehow worse. People could have forgiven her for running off with a charming leading man, but she ran off with a director, a non-American director, a man who was married. Ingrid and Roberto's marriage lasted about 13 years, which is actually pretty good by Hollywood standards, and by most accounts it was more genuine than her first marriage had been. But the scandal never fully left her. She was banned from American films for a significant period. She won her career back eventually, but it was a long fight. What Ingrid's story reveals is that when a beautiful, successful woman chooses a man outside the conventional system, the world interprets it as a moral failure rather than a different kind of choice. Audrey Hepburn was allowed to choose an older director, but Ingrid Bergman was condemned for it. The difference was context, timing, and the American moral panic of the 1950s. Grace Kelly and the Prince. Grace Kelly's marriage to Prince Rainier of Monaco is often remembered as a fairy tale. And in some ways it was. She was a famous actress who had worked with Alfred Hitchcock on films like Rear Window and To Catch a Thief, and won an Oscar for The Country Girl. He was a prince. They got married in a massive ceremony. She became a princess. It seems like a storybook ending, but it's worth looking at this more carefully. Grace Kelly was one of the most talented actors in Hollywood when she married Rainier. She was in her prime, and then she gave it all up to be a princess. Rainier was not a movie star. He was not handsome in the conventional Hollywood sense. He was a prince, which gave him status, but he wasn't famous in the way that Hollywood celebrities were famous. Grace married him and immediately stopped acting. She became a royal. She had children. She managed a principality. By most accounts, Grace was happy. She loved Rainier. She loved her children. She seemed to find genuine fulfillment in a life that was completely removed from Hollywood. And yet, there's a persistent sense in the historical record that she also grieved what she had given up. Late in her life, in interviews, Grace sometimes talked about missing the work, missing the creative fulfillment of acting. She had made the choice to marry a prince and become a princess, but that choice had costs. She couldn't have both. She had to pick. The interesting part of Grace's story is that it's the inverse of some of the others. Instead of marrying a man who wasn't a movie star and trying to maintain her career, she married a prince and abandoned her career entirely. She chose the man over the work, and while it seemed to work out, at least in terms of whether she and Rainier loved each other, it also seemed to represent a certain kind of loss. Joan Crawford and the men who couldn't match her. Joan Crawford was possibly the most powerful female star of her era. Another MGM contract player, she had been married 4 times, and her choice of husbands is instructive. They varied wildly. Some were actors, some were businessmen, but the pattern that emerges is that Joan seemed to seek men who were either beneath her or unable to control her. Her first husband was Douglas Fairbanks Jr., who was an actor and reasonably successful, but the marriage ended. Her second husband was Franchot Tone, who was also an actor. That ended too. Her third husband was Philip Terry, another actor, and that also failed. Her fourth husband was Al Steele, who was a businessman, not an actor at all. What's interesting about Joan's marriages is that she seemed to repeat the same pattern over and over. She would choose a man, the marriage would be intense and passionate for a while, and then it would fall apart. There were rumors of infidelity on both sides. There were stories of Joan's controlling behavior. There were allegations of her affairs with other women. Joan never really married for love in the way that some of these other women did. She married for status, for companionship, for the appearance of stability. But the marriages never held because Joan was too powerful, too ambitious, too difficult to merge her life with anyone else's. The difference between Joan's marriages and the others is that Joan never seemed to marry with the thought that a man could complete her, or change her, or give her something that her career couldn't. She married strategically, and those marriages, almost without exception, failed. Vivien Leigh and the man who understood her, Vivien Leigh, star of Gone with the Wind and A Streetcar Named Desire, married Laurence Olivier, and this marriage presents a different dynamic again. Both of them were brilliant actors. Both of them were famous. Both of them were talented in ways that the industry recognized and valued. On the surface, this looks like it should have been the successful marriage. 2 equals, 2 people who understood the work and the dedication it required. But what actually happened was much more complicated. Laurence Olivier was slightly more famous than Vivien, slightly more established, and as their marriage progressed, there seemed to be a persistent dynamic where Laurence's career took precedence. He did Shakespeare, he directed, he was treated as the greater talent. Vivien, meanwhile, was battling mental illness. She had severe bipolar disorder She had periods of brilliance and periods of devastating depression. Laurence seemed unable to support her through this. He was often distant. He was often critical. By most accounts, he was unfaithful. What's interesting about Vivien and Laurence is that marrying a fellow actor didn't solve any of the problems that the other women faced. It didn't create understanding. It created competition and resentment. Vivien seemed to need something that Laurence couldn't give her. She needed someone to simply love her as a person, separate from her talent or her success or her face. When Vivien and Laurence finally divorced, Vivien was devastated. She loved him, but she also realized that his love had always been conditional on her being a certain type of person in a certain type of state. When she was brilliant, he loved her. When she was struggling with her illness, he withdrew. Marilyn Monroe and the athlete Marilyn Monroe married Joe DiMaggio, and this is one of the most famous mismatches in Hollywood history. Marilyn was a movie star, a sex symbol, an actress. Joe DiMaggio was a baseball player. He was famous, but in a completely different world. He wasn't handsome in the movie star sense. He was an athlete, which is a different kind of appeal entirely. What Marilyn seemed to want from Joe was exactly what his world offered. She wanted someone who wasn't part of the Hollywood machine. She wanted someone who didn't care about image in the way that the studios did. She wanted someone who would protect her and make her feel safe. And initially, that's what Joe seemed to offer. But what actually happened was that Joe was deeply threatened by Marilyn's fame and her sexuality. He wanted her to stop being a sex symbol. He wanted her to cover up. He wanted her to be smaller, quieter, less visible. He was jealous of her power. Their marriage lasted less than a year. It was a catastrophic failure. But what's interesting is what it revealed about what Marilyn was actually seeking. She wasn't seeking a different kind of man because she wanted something better or worse. She was seeking safety. She was seeking someone who would love her as a person rather than as a symbol. The tragedy is that Joe couldn't give her that. He only wanted to control her. And when he realized he couldn't control her, he left. But before he left, he looked at a famous scene where Marilyn stood over a subway grate and her skirt blew up, and he was furious. That was the marriage in a nutshell. He wanted her to be beautiful, but he didn't want her to be sexual. He wanted her to be his, but he didn't want to share her with the world. Marilyn later married playwright Arthur Miller, seeking intellectual companionship and respect for her mind. But that marriage also struggled with the same fundamental issue. Miller, like the others, couldn't reconcile the public Marilyn with the private woman. Lana Turner and the Dangerous Choices. Lana Turner had 7 marriages, more than almost any other star of her era. She married actors, she married businessmen, she married producers. But what's interesting is that her marriages almost universally failed in the most dramatic and public ways possible. Her third husband was Lex Barker, who was an actor. That marriage ended in divorce and allegations of infidelity. Her fourth husband was Fernando Lamas, who was an actor and a womanizer. That marriage was volatile. What's remarkable is not the specific marriages, but the pattern. Lana seemed to choose men impulsively. She seemed to fall in love quickly and intensely, and then the marriages would fall apart, often publicly. The most famous incident involved Johnny Stompanato, who was allegedly a mobster. There were rumors of abuse, and in 1958, there was an incident in which her daughter stabbed Stompanato to death. The official ruling was self-defense, but the incident defined Lana's life from that point forward. She became not just a star, but a woman defined by scandal and violence. What emerges from Lana's story is that her choices in men were often destructive. She seemed drawn to dangerous men, to men who were exciting but unstable. And these choices cost her in ways that were far more significant than just bad marriages. They defined her public persona. They overshadowed her work. Which Hollywood idol's secret about their marriage surprised you most? Drop a comment below. When you look at all of these marriages together, certain patterns emerge. First, the most beautiful women in Hollywood did not necessarily choose the most handsome men. In fact, many of them deliberately chose men who were less conventionally attractive. Why? It seems like they were seeking something that physical beauty and movie star status couldn't provide. They were seeking respect. They were seeking partnership. They were seeking someone who wouldn't be threatened by their power. And sometimes they were just seeking escape from the Hollywood system itself. Second, these choices often didn't work out. The marriages fell apart. The women were hurt. They were betrayed. They were disappointed. Choosing outside the system didn't guarantee anything. It just meant different problems. Third, what seemed to matter more than anything was the woman's own relationship to her power and her success. When women like Elizabeth Taylor or Joan Crawford, fully in control of their own lives and their own careers, They had different relationships to their marriages. They weren't looking for a man to save them or complete them. They were looking for a partner. And when women like Marilyn Monroe or Ingrid Bergman were in situations where they felt they had to choose between their career and their marriage, between their success and their happiness, they seemed to suffer more deeply. The stories of these marriages are not really about whether the men were handsome or not. They're about what these women were actually seeking when they looked at their options and decided to choose differently. They were seeking to be seen. They were seeking to be protected. They were seeking to be understood. And sometimes, tragically, they were seeking to escape their own power. If you found yourself captivated by these stories of Hollywood's complicated loves, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the hidden histories of the Golden Age. Thanks for being here.